All right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you all can hear and see me okay. Welcome to our Vernal Equinox webinar. We are going to start off with a little bit of a feeding, just so that you guys can see the wolves and that our wolves can eat one of their weekly meals. Today we have a couple of beaver, a deer leg, and a deer head that we're going to be feeding. So before we actually get started with the actual webinar, we thought you guys might enjoy watching a little bit of this feeding behavior. You may notice that there is some white stuff inside the beaver there. That is lard. So we got that donated and we're trying to use it up while it's still kind of cold out. Usually when they get to kind of warmer temperatures, they don't really need that extra calorie source. So we're using up the lard while it's still kind of nice and chilly and they could actually use it. So you can see our curator Giselle with the wheelbarrow, and then our curator emeritus Lori walking behind with a bowl of meds for Grayson. He was a little picky this morning and decided not to take his meds, so we're offering it this afternoon. He just gets some daily supplements that are joint supplements as well as a daily vitamin. So nothing that's prescription strength, but just some stuff for him to kind of help out with some of that older age joint issues. So you may have noticed that these beaver are hairless or skun. We get our beaver from local trappers, so it's a really great way to kind of connect with the local community, provide them with a little bit of extra income, and also it's a really great wild prey source for our wolves. So usually they will trap the beaver and skin them, use the pelts for their business, and then we purchase the carcasses off of them for pretty cheap. So again, it's a really great way for our wolves to get some pretty wild food source, just like the roadkill deer that we feed out. So that's kind of our usual go-to meal for our wolf ambassadors is some sort of large-bodied carcass, like a deer or beaver. Sometimes we'll get other items donated as well. And then we offer supplemental feeding every morning. So whether that be commercial meats that have been donated, so things like chicken or burger, or any leftover carcass parts that we have kind of just laying around, they also make good use of and utilize quite a bit. So there you're seeing Kaz doing a little bit of a scent rolling behavior. That's probably on the lard. That's not something that they get very often. So a lot of times when they get more of a novel food source or a novel smell, they'll kind of scent roll a bit on it. There's a couple of theories as to why they may scent roll on things, but kind of the leading theory is that they're trying to kind of pick up that scent onto their coat so that they can bring it back to the rest of their pack and kind of say, hey, look what I found. So whether it be, a carcass that they're scent rolling on that they can then say, hey, look what I found, let's go scavenge on this carcass. Or if it is a scat from another wolf, they can say, hey, look, I smell like a stranger wolf. Maybe let's go patrol our territory. Of course, that's all just humans kind of coming up with, language for wolves, which isn't always super accurate. So we may never really know what's going on inside of their brains, but that's kind of the best that we can do to interpret it. So mostly Kaz and Blackstone and Grayson in interacting with the beaver there. Kaz is on the left, Blackstone is the one that just started a scent roll, and then Grayson is the white wolf in the back. I will zoom out a little bit and we can see who else is up and active. Looks like Lori and Giselle were unsuccessful with Grayson's meds, and that's okay. Axel in the back there doing some defecation and then a scrape afterwards. A lot of times they'll do that scrape afterwards as a kind of like an exclamation point. So defecating is a way to kind of mark your territory. It kind of spreads your scent around a little bit. And there he's doing a little bit of social behavior as well. A big tail wag and a bit of a bow stretch. And Lori's doing some greeting with him. And then, of course, Rika, ever in the mix, my guess is that she was a little preoccupied with the humans in the exhibit. She's definitely the most social wolf that we have, so she was probably taking full advantage of that while they were there. And now she's kind of investigating the deer head and now the deer leg a little bit as well. So we like to provide some variety, some options for them. Obviously, they get a full deer on Saturday nights, so it kind of defeats the purpose if we just constantly feed out the same thing. So that's why we have things like beaver, or that's why we have smaller parts like deer legs or deer heads as well. All right, well, I might kind of let them continue on. We'll take a peek at them later on in the evening and watch them while we answer some questions as well. So this won't be the last time you see the ambassador wolves, but we just wanted to kind of show you what they were up to, especially kind of during this brief feeding portion. You saw Grayson do that same scrape on the ground. So again, that's kind of just broadcasting their scent a little bit more than they would otherwise. So he's been feeling pretty confident lately. Giselle will kind of touch on that a bit later, but you can see that high tail, the scrape, he's definitely feeling pretty good as Blackstone walks off with the head. So like I said, we'll tune back in with these guys later. We'll kind of see what they're up to, but for now it looks like everybody's kind of interacting with some of the food. I think Axel might have walked off. He did end up eating quite a bit of meat this morning that we gave out, so he might have a full belly already. All right, so I'll switch over to the PowerPoint that we have, or one of the PowerPoints that we have presented or prepared, and then we can kind of get going. So, like I said, welcome to our Vernal Equinox webinar. Vernal Equinox just means it's kind of the first day of spring. It's the spring equinox. Usually we use the word solstice if we're talking about summer or winter, but equinox if we're talking about fall or spring. And then vernal just being a word for spring. Here's kind of the agenda, kind of what we have in store for you guys today, just so you know where we're at in terms of presentation. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about what wolves are up to in the wild. Now, a lot of this is going to apply to our wolves here at the International Wolf Center as well. They have the same physiology, the same behavioral changes, the same hormones, everything like that. But there are some behaviors that we don't see with our pack because they are, a captive pack and because they don't have a breeding individual. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the end of breeding season, what that means as we approach that, and as kind of we pass that now into March. And then we'll also be talking about den preparation, what wolves do to kind of choose a den or get ready for rearing pups, and then some hormonal changes that we see in wolves that will also impact some of their behaviors as well. And then our curator, Giselle, is going to take over. We'll talk a little bit about what our ambassador wolves are up to here at the International Wolf Center. She'll also be talking about some facility and exhibit updates, as well as some general wolf care department updates. And then to end off the evening, both Giselle and I will answer some of your questions while we watch the exhibit pack on our live cameras. So just like you saw a little earlier when we were kind of watching their feeding, we'll kind of pull that screen up again so you can watch them while we answer any of your questions. So if any point during the presentation you think of a good question you would like to ask us that you would like an answer for, please feel free to put it in the Q&A tab. You don't have to wait till the end. You can kind of do it at any point during the presentation. If you are just giving a general comment, put it in the comments tab. We'll kind of keep an eye on both, but for the Q&A tab, kind of keep those just to questions. All right. So I will go ahead and get started. We'll talk a little bit about what wild wolves are up to. And like I said, a lot of this is going to be relevant for our own ambassador wolves as well. But this is kind of specifically geared towards more of a wild population of wolves. So right now we are at the end of breeding season in most areas. For gray wolves, their breeding season typically takes place from January to March, but this is going to be pretty dependent on latitude. So pretty much based on where in the world are they, what's their climate like. For wolf populations at higher latitudes, like wolves in the Arctic, for example, they're going to have later breeding seasons. So think March, think April. Whereas wolf populations at lower latitudes, so wolves here in the lower 48 states, like wolves here in Minnesota, we're going to have a little bit earlier breeding seasons, so usually January or February. Now, the reason for this is because, you want pups to be born when it's actually nice weather out. Pups are pretty fragile and they don't do too well with extreme weathers. So we want kind of a nice mild spring temperature for them when they're first born. So that's why wolves kind of will differentiate their breeding season based off of what climate that they're in. For a female's reproductive system, we don't see this quite as much with wolves, here at our facility because we do spay and neuter our wolves, but a female's first estrus cycle usually takes place at around 22 months of age or older. Their estrus being, their heat cycle, some people refer to it as, or when they're kind of in that reproductive stage. They're usually able to reproduce beginning at 2 to 4 years of age, and then they're usually regularly producing from about 4 to 9 years of age, assuming that they are in a pack, an established pack, and that they are the dominant female at that stage. They're usually no longer reproductive past 10 or 11 years of age. They kind of reach reproductive senescence. So that just means that their fertility goes down a lot and they just kind of lose that ability to reproduce as they get into those older years. Wolves are monoestrous, which means that they have one estrus cycle per year, and that usually lasts about 1 week in length. Whereas domestic dogs, usually have at least 2 estrus cycles per year. There's some breeds that have fewer than that, some breeds that just have the 1 cycle a year, but wolves are always just going to have that one breeding season, that 1 cycle, which makes them a little bit more, unique and more kind of tied to their hormones, that kind of cyclical pattern than dogs would be. We also tend to see a lot of courtship and a lot of bonding behaviors, typically around 2 months prior to estrus. So even before breeding season even starts, you're still going to see some behavioral changes kind of within the wild population. Copulation usually coincides with estrus, so that's kind of when they're able to reproduce is that estrus stage. So that's when they're going to begin to copulate. And a lot of times that'll happen multiple times during that period, during that 1 week span. I also wanted to note here that the suppression of reproduction is behavioral, not physiological. So what I mean by that is it's not always just about their, physiology or about their biology. It's not a very set in stone period of time that they're going to begin to ovulate. A lot of times it depends on their pack structure, kind of who is dominant, if there is a dominant individual at that time. So for example, with females, they may begin to ovulate sooner than 22 months, so at a younger age, if there is no dominant female present. And then as long as those younger adults remain subordinate within their natal groups, mating and reproduction are typically delayed. Not always. You will sometimes have packs that have multiple breeding individuals, but those are pretty rare, especially here in kind of our Minnesota ecosystem. We tend not to have those kind of extra large packs that you see in places like Yellowstone at times. So now that we kind of talked about how that breeding season kind of happens, now that that's kind of come to an end, wolves are generally going to start thinking about pups, kind of start preparing for pups. Usually that den preparation can begin in kind of early spring, but it can happen in fall as well before the ground freezes. But a lot of times they'll kind of wait until early spring, kind of closer to pup whelping season. A gray wolf's gestation period is usually around 2 months, but they are not going to be denning that entire time. They may be kind of localizing around that den, but they will not be actually going in that den constantly until they are ready to give birth. So for choosing a den site, choosing a site that is safe for the pups and good for the female, there's a lot of different kind of denning structures that we tend to see. Usually a dugout burrow is kind of the most common, or a lot of times you'll see kind of some of the other ones listed, but it'll also kind of be a dugout combined. So a rock or a cave or crevice, under a tree stump, usually, you know, a little dugout beneath that, a hollowed out log even, or even just a shallow pit without much cover. The only downside of that is any kind of predators flying above can definitely kind of spot those pups, even though they kind of blend in with that darker undercoat. And it's not very sheltered against the environment, but they have been seen to kind of den in those shallow pits as well. But most often they'll use a previously used den. So those dens kind of get passed down within the territory. If it's the same breeding female and the same breeding male, a lot of times they'll just kind of reuse that same den, or they'll have multiple dens within their territory that they'll kind of choose between. But there have been times where they've had plenty of den sites that have been adequate, but for some reason they start to build a new den. Wolf dens usually have kind of the same basic requirements. So it needs to be near a water source and ideally with well-drained soils. And I'll kind of get to that last point in a few slides here, but you definitely want it near a water source because the wolf, the mom, you know, the dominant female can't really leave the pups for too long. When they're at that really young neonate stage, they need to eat every couple of hours. And so if the female is leaving for long periods of time, that's potentially time that those pups are going without food. Now, there may be times where the rest of the pack can bring her food or can bring her, you know, kind of something to eat, kind of keep her going, but, you know, they can't bring her water. So there definitely needs to be a water source nearby that she can leave, get water, and return pretty quickly to her pups. All dens, or most dens, I should say, require a little bit more cover or shelter from the elements and predators. Definitely pups have trouble thermoregulating, so they kind of require a little bit of protection from extreme weather events, things like rain, wind. They can get hypothermic really easy, but they can also overheat really easy too. So kind of a cooler shaded den is the best way to keep a pretty constant temperature throughout that young puphood. And then predators will come along, and if they stumble across a den without a mother in it, you know, there may be a chance that those pups are killed. So a lot of times, you know, they kind of have dens that are a little more tucked away or sheltered. However, there have been quite a few dens that have been more out in the open, so they have kind of a wide view of what's going on around their den, and maybe even be able to kind of protect it a little better, knowing what predators are coming from what angles. The dens also need to be large enough for the mother to whelp a litter, although the rest of the pack is not really going to utilize that den. Usually you're not going to have all the members of the pack using the den. It's just going to be the mom, and it's just going to be when she's whelping a litter. And then it's also going to be pretty important that that den is within their territory. If you have other wolves nearby, and those pups, you know, wander off into another territory, or if a wolf from another territory wanders into your territory, you don't want to risk that chance of that pup kind of coming in contact with a wolf that's not within your pack. It usually doesn't end too well for the pup. Oh my goodness, that is loud. Sorry about that. For den preparation, what I mean by that is kind of just getting the den ready, clearing it out, making sure it's big enough for the female and for the pups. So this is actually a video of, I believe it was Lakota, so one of our previous wolf ambassadors, digging out a den. Obviously, she was not pregnant at the time, but she was still kind of engaging in some of that denning activity. Pack members of any sex or any status may participate in den digging, along with the breeding female of the pack. It's typically only the breeding female that actually uses the den, like I mentioned, but she may be a little territorial if other pack members start to try to, you know, engage with her or engage with the pups at that young point. So usually once they start to get older and start to venture outside of the den, it's not an issue, but she can be a little more territorial if they're trying to invade that den space. Wolves also localize around a den for up to a month before whelping pups, so they may be kind of hanging around the den site just in case she's, ready to give birth. They want to be nearby a secure location. And then this den's usually going to be used for around 8 weeks or so during the rearing of pups. After the pups are old enough, they'll kind of leave that den site and go to a rendezvous site where they'll kind of continue their growth. Here is a video from the Voyagers Wolf Project. I'll kind of narrate over some of it, but I also want to give you a chance to kind of read everything on your own. So those of you who don't know about the Voyagers Wolf Project, they're located up in kind of north central Minnesota in Voyagers National Park, and they do a lot of really awesome work with collaring and tagging wolves, but also a lot of great work with using game cameras. So this is the female kind of coming up to the den. So you can see she's a little pregnant there. She goes into the den to go give birth. So looking at this den site, it's a pretty nice site off, first impressions. It's kind of underneath a hollowed out tree here, kind of a root system that's kind of protecting the entrance. This is last year's pup kind of coming up, looking for some food, doing some kind of more submissive posturing, whining. That's the mother coming out of the den. You can see how vigilant they are too when they kind of exit the den like that. So near a creek, near a nice water source. I should also mention that the reason that the Voyagers Wolf Project knew to put a camera here is because this was a den that was utilized in the past. So they knew that this was already a den site for a wolf. So they just kind of crossed their fingers and hope that this is the one that they choose this year, and it turned out to be the right one. I feel like, I don't know for sure, but I think that they do that with a lot of the dens whenever they have a den site. If it looks like it's been recently used, or if they know that it's recently been used, I feel like they probably would put trail cameras up on that just in case. So if you missed some of that text, that was just saying that the den began to flood. So the creek nearby kind of overflowed, kind of seeping into that den. Lots of snow melt kind of causing that flooding. So the dominant female is now taking the pups out of the den and relocating them somewhere else. Probably to a more, a drier area, probably another secure place. And although she's carrying them with her mouth, that's not her hurting them or anything, that's just her moving them around gently. But yeah, I wanted to show you this video just because it kind of shows how intricate these dens can be, and how important it is for them to be in kind of a well-drained area. Obviously, you can't really predict flooding, but there's a good chance that this may not be a common occurrence. It may not flood every year, so maybe they've used this in the past and it's worked out, but now it's flooding. I think that's pretty much the rest of that video. Oops. Let's see if I can get out of this. There we go. So now that you kind of saw a little bit about, what wolves are doing right now, which is kind of preparing the den, getting it ready, I also wanted to touch on hormones, kind of the shift of hormones now that we've reached spring. In winter, their seasonal hormones usually consist of like testosterone, estrogen, and other kind of steroid hormones, which coincide with wolf mating behaviors. So we're going to see a lot more increased activity, some increased testing behaviors. So things like that include chin resting, direct staring, blocking, hightails, riding up, mounting, and standovers, as well as a variety of other kind of more, posturing or more dominance related behaviors. But we're also going to see an increase in pair bonding or in social behaviors as well. So for pair bonding, a lot of what we look for are, parallel gating, resting in proximity to each other, following each other around, basically spending, their entire time together, rubbing under their chin, soft muzzle bites, and then marking and overmarking, via, urinations, sometimes defecations. That tends to be kind of a sign of social bonding or a sign of pair bonding. However, as we kind of reach spring, we're going to start to see the production of prolactin, which is a hormone produced in the pituitary gland. So, although all of our wolves are spayed and neutered, they're still going to produce a lot of these hormones, because a lot of it's produced in the brain, not just in their sex organs. So, prolactin peaks in all adult pack members, so both the males, the females, and regardless of rank within the pack. So the dominant individuals and the more subordinate individuals are all going to produce this prolactin, and this kind of peaks during spring whelping season. So when pups are born. This hormone triggers a lot of behavioral changes, including promoting a bit more parental or nurturing behaviors that allow the entire pack to accept the pups and help kind of provide care for them. Now, we rely on prolactin quite a bit here at the Wolf Center because we do introduce our pups to the pack, and they are non-related individuals. They are not constantly forming that bond from that very start of their lives, when they're in that neonate stage. So we want to make sure that we are introducing those pups to those adults when they still have that prolactin in their system, when they're still kind of in that nurturing mode, where they're a lot more accepting of new individuals. So here's another couple of videos from the Voyager's Wolf Project showing the importance of that prolactin, of that accepting, nurturing hormone. As you can see, this is probably a little later in the season. This is not early spring for sure, but definitely still some pretty young pups. They're doing a lot of food begging behavior, a lot of kind of muzzle licking, pawing at the muzzles of the adults. And the adults are very, very tolerant of what the pups are up to. So this example especially has a pretty eager pup, a little bit older than the ones in the video before, but that is the dominant male. That is on the receiving end of all of this food begging behavior, all of this submission, and he's being incredibly tolerant of this pup. So usually if this was an older individual that was not being kind of more of this in this puppy stage, the dominant individual might be a little bit more quick to give them corrections or kind of let them know, hey, quit it, that is just too much. We call this obnoxious submission as well, so where they're constantly kind of pawing and rolling on their back, just really actively submitting in a way that may be a little over the top at times, and may kind of get on the more annoying side to the adults. But as you can see, that adult male is really being very, very tolerant of that younger pup. I think that's kind of the end, a little bit more. So yeah, like I said, this is probably a little later in the season, closer to summer, but they still have that prolactin in their system at this time. Although it peaks in spring, it kind of stays in their system and starts to kind of wean out towards fall when they start production of those breeding season hormones. So yeah, that's pretty much all we're seeing. What's going on with wild wolves. I'm going to switch over to Giselle so she can talk a little bit about what our exhibit pack is up to. And I will tune back in when we do our question and answers. So I'll mute myself and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Abby. That was wonderful presentation and very, very good videos, good finds. I was in distress, just like the mom there, trying to move pups and find a safe place. So that was, yeah, very interesting to watch for sure. All right, so bear with me while I share my screen now and tell you a little bit about what our pack has been up to, and what we also have been up to. Um, all right, so over here, if you are somewhere near where we are located, you've already kind of noticed that it's been a pretty, oh, what's going on? It's been a pretty mild winter. So definitely the exhibit looks very different from what we usually see. The wolves have been also kind of following that pattern of a little bit more calm than usual. And you can see Blackstone here resting. Um, so a pretty calm season for sure. Um, there's obviously days. We got finally some snow, and we're getting some um, decreased temperature these days. So we're expecting a little bit more activity. But definitely it has been just a very, very calm season. And we keep hearing um, from Wolfcare team members that have been doing this for many years, and from Lori saying, oh, wow, this is a calm winter. And part of it, um, is this difference in temperatures, snow, um, but certainly it doesn't mean that nothing has been happening. And I'll give you some examples of those interactions. Here's Grayson and Kaz. Those two have certainly have some very interesting things going on. We think Grayson is really picking up on some potential future, maybe um, leadership from Cass. He's a very confident, yet very submissive to him. It's, as you can see here, that's Grayson, and then Cass just completely rolling over. And a lot of times when this is happening, when Grayson is interacting like this with Cass and sort of asserting his dominance and or correcting him, Rika comes around. This is like a very, very common thing that we've been seeing throughout this season. Um, it's certainly hard. I think one of the questions in there is about, has Rika pair bonded yet? Has she chosen someone? It's we continue to wait and see. There's definitely, she's part of the question was, is she leaning towards someone? And as you can see, as this video progresses, you can see some social behaviors, some social interactions happening between Grayson and Rika. And then Cass getting in between. He's kind of trying to, obviously, we can't read a wolf's mind. We can only interpret what we're seeing. So that's what we're doing. And you can see that's Grayson and Rika again engaging in sort of that social behavior, and Cass trying to get in the middle. A lot of times, this goes well, and it might sort of dissipate on its own, but sometimes it kind of turns around and Rika shifts her mood or her focus. Again, we don't know how to explain what's going on there, but she might then turn it into a focus on Grayson and maybe grab by his rear, and then it turns into a little bit more of a tense interaction. But it's very interesting to watch. Certainly, I think the complexity of this is that, yes, we see these behaviors with Grayson, yet she seems to be just very protective. And I don't know if protective is the right word, but of Cass, because whenever, and I think this is decreasing a little bit. She's kind of been seeing Grayson correcting him or being a little bit harsh on him, from our perspective, harsh. And she kind of lets it happen, but sometimes when it gets too loud, or at some point she says, "That's enough," she might come to Kaz's rescue. So it's just really interesting to see. So we wouldn't say that she's pair bonded yet. Um, I think that would be very obvious, since if you think back to what Abby was saying, on those behaviors, I think there's a lot to say here, that it's kind of split. Um, that we don't have something definitive yet. Again, she's gonna turn 3 this year, um, in May 23rd. So she is reaching, that maturity level. And we're certainly seeing that she's there's that bite. um, we're certainly seeing her reach a little bit of a certain maturity level where she's facing things off a little bit more, um, and and being a little bit more confident around the yearlings. But even just earlier today, I saw Kaz, um, mounting her and grabbing her neck while mounting her, and she just kind of rolled over. So those kinds of things sometimes are, it's dynamic, right? It's really hard to put something on stone. Here, I think a little bit of context is important, right? As you can see, there's some focus on that ice there. This was, earlier this week, I believe, this past weekend, when we got some snow and there's some ice, and they really like, at least the, um, Cas and Blackstone, they really liked hanging out on the ice and doing those stiff leg jumps. And sometimes there'll be food or some interesting smells kind of frozen into the ground, and that gets their attention. And sometimes doing those kinds of things brings the attention of other pack members. And we're seeing here Rika doing a bit of a write up on Blackstone. And she definitely does. This is what I would describe their relationship like. Um, that's very much sums it up. I think sometimes Blackstone gets frustrated, from that focus that Rika has on him. She certainly, we see a lot of, um, I might pause this a little bit, but we sometimes see in situations where Kaz and Blackstone are engaging in wrestling or some testing of each other, she might come around and then start focusing on Blackstone and biting his rear. And he's now, um, having a bit of a collection of scabs in that area, which we constantly have to be, looking at, making sure he's feeling okay, and kind of cleaning that area. And sometimes if it's too dry, we also try to, um, put we use propylene glycol, which is supposed to, um, help moisturize the skin, their coat. So that's been a very useful tool that I think Grayson, for example, with all of the Rika grabbing his rear, he does also have, seasonally speaking, he gets some scabs in that area, and that propylene glycol helps a little bit with moisturizing the area and helping loosen up some of those scabs. And I think he really likes it. He lets us do that for him. So, here's again, it's very similar to that previous video where we have Grayson and Cass sort of having this interaction where Cass has been very submissive. I do have to point out there's some, if you look at the pump, this is our pump housing where the pond, all of the pump functioning stuff is in. You can see that there's some items on top of the pump house where they lay. There's some food around. I think Grayson is guarding, some a food item right here. So a lot of times it involves food. And again, we see the same pattern of Rika checking out, all right, what's going on here? And she's been very tolerant. Obviously, Grayson's not doing much. He's just standing his ground, high tail. Um, and Cass just continues being extremely, submissive and kind of doing a bit of appeasement, and now he's just completely rolled over. So Rick is just checking out what's going on, but you'll see that this also kind of turns into um, a bit of a focus on Grayson by Rika. She's already sniffing his rear, but again, she's been very relatively tolerant of the whole situation and just checking in what's going on. Um, yeah, me forward that a bit because I think she even just like, all right, this is under control. She lays down, and then I think eventually in a little bit she decides for some reason that that's enough, and she goes for his leg. This was just yesterday. Um, so again, this is the pattern that we've been seeing between those three. So it's kind of sometimes a bit contradicting their relationship, but I think a big difference that I think I've mentioned before is that Grayson, compared to last winter, Grayson is a lot more um, coming forward and he's a lot more confident. And he's also looking for more of those interactions with Rika. So that's a big difference from the previous year. Um, and then I need to play this. This is an example here of another thing that was a big hit um, during this whole, well, thank you, Maddie, for this video, by the way. Maddie Witt is it's our education manager. She took this video and it's one of the best things I've seen. It's just Blackstone being Blackstone, and he's really, he seems to enjoy when those vernal pools freeze up in the enclosure or in the exhibit. He likes laying in there and just uh, maybe that helps a bit with cooling down if it's kind of like a warmer day. You can see the sun's out, but this is a place that I would say Blackstone really enjoys spending his time. Sometimes Cass will join, but he likes it for himself, it seems like. Um, a little bit on Axel. This was earlier today. He was resting on the greeting rock. For some reason, he's taken a like of resting here. One thing about Axel that, as you know, he was diagnosed with sebaceous adenitis, which is a skin condition that affects the sebaceous glands, which produce sebum that keeps your skin moisturized and it keeps your hair healthy. That's just to summarize it. And he was put into this treatment. Cyclosporin is usually what works for sebaceous adenitis. It helps kind of keep that condition under control. And if you remember from last year and from what we see now, he's got a full coat. The treatment was certainly very successful in that way. However, at one point, usually after 6 months of that treatment, it's recommended that you try to find the lowest dose that you can give that is effective. And we've been working on, all right, finding what's that dose that's the perfect balance to keep things under control, but also not too high so that it can be kind of toxic to his organs, but not too low so that it doesn't treat what needs to be treated. So it's a very tricky thing. Again, this is not a condition that we found a lot of literature. There's no other wolves with sebaceous adenitis documented, so it's made it a little bit tricky. So what we are currently now, if you have been watching Axel, if you've been watching our cameras and our updates, he was having a bit of a change in his behavior. Also, we are obviously monitoring stools whenever we go in, we're looking at scat, we're looking at just their overall physical behavioral health. And so one thing that we noticed with him was his scat was looking a little bit mucusy, more runny. And for that, we started taking measures on working on that dose and also working on our feeding schedules to help with kind of balance that. and have him feel good, have him feel better. We're trying to have for him a good quality of life, not just for him to look good, right? We want him to feel good too. That's the most important thing, for him to feel good and be himself. So that's what we're working hard for right now. And at the moment, he's not taking any medication. We're letting his system sort of clear of all of that. And then I think for tomorrow will be 2 weeks since that. And then we'll reassess on what are the next steps in consultation with our vet. So that's where we're at with him. However, those 2 weeks, one thing, a positive thing that we've seen, those 2 weeks without meds, we've seen some improved behaviors from him. And when I say improved behaviors, is that we're seeing what we want to see from a wolf, right? He's got a good appetite, so his appetite has sort of increased. You can see that he's at the carcass, and this was the what's for dinner on the 9th. He was dominating, and that's, if you think back in the past, if you're familiar with our pack, that's one of the things that characterized, I think, Axel versus Grayson. He would dominate that carcass, and he was really guarding the carcass here. So you can see that's Axel here, and then both Blackstone and Cass are kind of like, I don't know that I'm sharing my sound here, but let me see. Anyway, I think you get the idea of it. He's growling, he's snapping at them, and he's keeping them away from the carcass. So that was a really good sign for us that he's feeling better. One thing that we were struggling with, we were definitely doing a lot of hand feeding. We were increasing carcass feedings for him to have options, and seeing this was just wonderful for us. And so that has been a good sign. And definitely a little bit more engagement in pack activity and with handlers, but we're certainly wanting to get full Axel back, so we'll keep you posted on what those coming decisions are for sure. And so I will share my camera. I do not have a lot of exhibit facility updates, but let me show you a little bit of what we've been up to now that seasons are going to be changing, which is funny because it has been just, it looked like spring. It looked like, it actually felt, it got into the 60s last week, and then today we're back to, I don't know, windy, cold, and we got the snow. So one thing that we worked on, and you can see ravens are feasting, but one thing that actually Abby and Lori worked on was, this is something that we have to be on top of every year after winter, and once it gets warmed up a bit, we pressure wash these rocks because we have a lot of raven activity around here, especially when there's food like that. So pressure washing rocks and keeping the exhibit clean and looking good. We used to have some, oh, too much. We had a lot of hay because in the winter, the wolves really enjoy laying in front of the windows here, and get some of the sunlight that comes through in the morning, and just they would lay down here in line, all 5 of them. But once it warmed up, we decided to start removing hay. It was getting wet, it was getting smelly, so part of the cleaning, part of the preparing was removing that hay. And we still have, just today I went to pick up more for bedding because temperatures are going to drop, of course. When you start deciding to do, all right, it's spring and it's time to clean up and get ready, that's when it says, just kidding, no. We still have a little bit more winter probably to go. I think we're expecting some snow. So yeah, we definitely are always looking on the the weather forecast, as you may know. However, we do have this space here under the eaves that earlier today was a bit rainy, so we were able to offer that dry space, and they have different options. I will switch again because I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure that I cover some other updates that y'all should be aware of. Um, and that is there is some wolf care staff updates, and that is as you if you follow with the wolf care department and the ambassador wolves, you know that Lori is retiring this year. It's actually coming up pretty soon, and can't believe everything happened so quickly. And so that means we had, um, actually, I should say, first off, at the beginning of this year, Abby was promoted to assistant wolf curator. So Abby has just proven throughout all this time just to be a wonderful caretaker of our wolves, and so well deserved. She worked hard, and we really appreciate the wolves appreciate her. So she is now the assistant wolf curator. And so I figured we haven't really had a webinar since last year, and this happened in January. Um, so congratulate her through whatever channels you interact. But um, that means that as Lori exits, we also have, and as Abby got promoted, we had the wolf care specialist position open up, and it was a very long process of many applications and many interviews, and we finally offered a position to someone. So I cannot say yet because it's there's some stuff that needs to happen first, some paperwork, but just know that we'll have someone new, a new face that comes with a lot of good experience, and also with a past here at the International Wolf Center that will take over as the wolf care specialist. So speaking of Lori and her retirement, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge. I wish I could do a bigger thing, but I think she would not like that. So just really quick acknowledge that I think usually when people think about the International Wolf Center and they think of Dave Meach as the founder, and that's right. He was the founder of the Wolf Center. But when I think of the Ambassador Wolf program, um, you got to think of Lori. Having an exhibit pack and a wolf Ambassador Wolf program. Um, I think it was all thanks to all of her hard work to make it work. Um, and she dedicated her life to make this work, have a cohesive pack that represents wolf behavior, and be able to teach the world about wolves properly just with coming and seeing them, not just in person, but also through webcams and programs like this. So I think just, I mean, the good thing for us, or the good news for us, is that she will continue volunteering just like as a wolf care team member. And she will also be contracted and consulted whenever there's any wolf management issues that we need guidance, we need advice, because obviously we can't learn all of her 30 something years of experience managing ambassador wolves. We can't learn that in the short years we've been here. She definitely has huge knowledge, and that's just going to be crucial as we move forward. So I just want to acknowledge she's yeah, she's loved, and she has an incredible legacy that we will try to carry on here. I think that's it for me. I will try to just shut up so that we have enough time for questions and answer anything that maybe I didn't cover.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Giselle. I think you're spot on with Lori. It's gonna be weird not having her involved with the decisions as much, but I mean, we're still gonna respect her her presence here and her opinion on all things wolf, because she definitely has all the experience that is worth sharing. Um, I'll kind of start answering some of the questions just so we kind of keep things on track. There's Blackstone coming out of the den there. I'll try to also move the camera so we can actually see wolves. I think everyone's kind of hunkered down a little bit now that they got their fill of food. Um, I see a question about the Arctics here at IWC, so that's Axel and Grayson, and whether or not they have a delay in the production of winter and spring hormones because they come from a different, or sorry, a more northern region. So do their cycles coordinate with the rest of the pack mates, or are they different because of their, um, regional, uh, where they come from, their where they originate from. Um, it seems that hormone production is more tied with photoperiod and with temperature of climate. So generally, it doesn't really coincide with what locality they are. So for example, the Arctic population versus the Mexican gray wolf population. If they are located in the same latitude, they're likely going to have similar, if not the same, rate of production. Um, I don't know exactly what paper it was that mentioned that, but I do know that it seems to be more tied to photoperiod and so amount of light in the day, that kind of triggers the production of those hormones, as well as temperature. Um, so yeah, good question. I know that's one that um, we get asked often a lot here in our visitor center as well. So.
Okay, looks like we have a few more minutes for questions. Some people are congratulating you, and of course, just comments about Lori. Yeah, so if there's no more questions, although I'll wait, you can always email us, and we're happy um, to answer anything that you observe. If you're on explore.org, we really try to keep up with the chat there. And if not, I think other people that have been watching for a while and hearing us answer things are pretty good also at covering some bases. So sometimes sometimes you guys answer questions anyway. So yeah. And here's Blackstone trying to keep ravens away, but it's a hard work for sure.
I'm gonna mention something real quick. Sorry, if you hear weird echo, it's because Giselle and I are in the same room, so we have to wait for one to mute before the other one talks. I did want to mention that this is one of our newer cameras that you're seeing here. This is what we call the enrichment window camera. I believe we shared it on one of the past webinars that we had, but I know a few of you haven't seen that one or weren't involved with that one quite as much. So I wanted to share this one with you too. I believe it was installed with the funding from our Give to the Wolves Day. Well, part of the funding, not all of the funding, but part of the funding went to this camera here, which has been just amazing for seeing all sorts of different places in the exhibit right from our desk or from our homes even. We have the cameras on our cell phones so we can always check in on the wolves, see how they're doing. But this back den, for example, you can see it on the Explore camera very well, but you can't see it from really any of the other cameras very well. So this has been, a nice way to kind of utilize this space that wasn't being used before. We can also see under the eaves, it seems that the wolves have been hunkering down there for the most part recently, because it's been so windy, a little bit of rain, a little bit of snow. So that's kind of been their sheltered area. And we can also see on top of the slate den, which we don't really get a good view of without this camera, especially in the summertime. All of these trees that you're seeing are usually covered in bright green foliage, so you can't really see this back den. Even from the windows, you can't see it very well. So this has been a real treat for us who work here. It's been very important for us to be able to monitor the wolves this way. So thank you all for those who donated in that.
Yeah, and I see a question about how did the auction go? And I believe it was close to 26,000. Is that right? It was a bit above 25,000. So again, thank you so much to everyone who donated items, as well as everyone that was involved in the bidding and just spreading the word about the auction. We'll probably um, have some more information moving forward through email communications. But yes, it went really well, and Abby and Krista worked really hard to coordinate everything and just have everything on time. It's just amazing to have a team like this, really. Um, let's see what else I see here in terms of I see a question here um, from Beth saying, what's the mortality birth rate between wild and exhibition wolves? So I'm guessing wild versus captive wolves. What's the mortality birth rate? I'm guessing maybe like pup survival is your question. What's the likelihood of pups to survive the birth or their puphood? I do not have exactly like rates in mind unless Abby has them, but I would think that this highly depends on the wild population we're talking about. I know that as you saw in the oops, hold on. As you saw in the I'm having some feedback right now. Oh, I think it's the Explorer. As you saw in Abby's video on the denning process and like how that den flooded, there's a lot of factors that influence pup survival that sometimes has to do with the amount of resources that the mom has, the pack has access to, and sometimes summers can be kind of rough. But also, there's so much risk in the in-between of, getting pregnant, giving birth, and then surviving puphood. There's a lot of things that could happen in the wild. I would say, um, other than that, comparing it to captive wolves, just thinking about overall how long they live, there's a big difference. And I would think maybe with the exhibit or captive wolves, you see a little bit less of those factors impacting their survival. So maybe a higher rate of survival, but sometimes when you start putting your hands too much as humans and like the rearing, that could also be another factor impacting survival. That's what I would say, but I don't know if Abby has other kind of information that I didn't cover.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much covered it. Definitely pups survive longer in captivity, or there's a better likelihood of pup survival in captivity just because of humans are able to intervene and do medications, give vaccinations, things like that. They're usually safe from predators and from different weather conditions, things like that. So generally, higher survival in captivity due to that. There's been a couple of different pup survival studies around the area. Here in Minnesota, I know of a couple that have estimated pup mortality to be between 40 and 60%. So, 40 to 60% of them survive, and then 40 to 60% of them do not survive. But there's also been another study that was a bit smaller, so it's more telling when you have more information. You have more data points to kind of go off of. But there was another study done with kind of a smaller subset that had a higher survival rate. So I think it was 60 to 80% survived. But again, it can be very variable with, region. It can be very variable with climate, temperature. Winter severity can be a big thing, especially if there's like nutritional deficiencies. For example, this past winter, there wasn't a lot of food for wolves just because there was no snow. Wolves do a lot better with deeper snowpacks because the prey, usually deer, will kind of tire out easier and earlier when there's deeper snow. So wolves are usually able to be a bit more successful in their hunting because of that. Whereas this year, with no snow, there's really not much slowing deer down. So they're able to run away at full speed, not be kind of inhibited by snow at all. So I think wolves this winter kind of took a hit in terms of food availability. So there may be some kind of repercussions of that we see in mortality studies this coming spring or summer, especially with pups. So I'd be curious to watch some of the pup studies that take place this coming year to kind of see how that lack of food and that lack of nutrition may have influenced their survival. So I'm definitely going to be watching, Voyagers Wolf Project and, the Minnesota DNR Wolf Project, all of those kind of different wolf and pup studies in the area to kind of see what their results are. But great question for sure. I have a question that says, here in West Europe, I see especially the last 14 days before whelping, the female really prepares the den. But with you so often much earlier, of course, several spots are somewhat prepared, so she still has den choice at the last minute, but most of the work here still happens in the last few days. Of course, we have much milder climate. I would agree. While wolves start to prepare dens potentially as early as the fall before or as early as right after estrus, there's still kind of the main shift of preparing the den, I would say closer to the actual whelping date. Although I think it's hard to tell is kind of what I've seen in all of the research that I was reading the past couple of days, because the wolves tend to localize in that area anyway, so it's kind of hard to tell if they are actually doing den preparations or if they're just hanging out in their area knowing that there's a den nearby that they can prepare pretty quickly. I'm sure a lot of it comes down to kind of the state of the den too. So for example, if they stop by the den in fall and they see that it's pretty much ready to go, maybe they don't feel the need to kind of stick around and prepare it super early. But if they stop by and it looks like it's kind of a state and they don't have any other dens nearby that they wanted to use, maybe they would kind of invest a bit more time into that. I definitely think that's something that more research could be done in, whether that be, trail cameras on those dens earlier in the season to kind of see how wolves utilize that den or start preparing that den from earlier in the season rather than just the whelping period. But yeah, I think that would be definitely interesting to take a look at. Now we're seeing Rika kind of munching on one of the beavers. Glad one wolf is making use of it. It looks like she's kind of reaching inside to eat either some of the lard or maybe some of the organ meat. They seem to kind of prefer that sometimes to the actual muscle meat that you're seeing on the outside there. But yeah, I'll answer maybe one last question. I know we're kind of running out of time here and I don't want to keep you guys, but here's a question from Heidi that says, at Lakota Wolf Preserve, they said that newborn pups need their bottoms licked in order to defecate. So they patted pups' bottoms with wet paper towels. Yes, that is definitely something that we have to do as well. It's called stimulation. We have to stimulate them to urinate and to defecate. So we usually take kind of a wet, soft paper towel. We like the Viva brand. Very specifically, we like Viva. And you just kind of gently rub at their genital area to kind of stimulate them to urinate or defecate when they are that young. They usually will start, Riker just kind of lunged at some ravens. They'll usually start defecating and urinating on their own pretty early on, but when they're in that like kind of neonate stage of 0 to 14 days or so, it's really important to make sure that you're helping them expel what needs to be expelled. because wolves will lick at the genitals in the wild. Obviously, we're not going to do that. That's not in my pay position, but not in my job description. But um, definitely we have to kind of help them out when we can. So. All right. I think that's probably gonna call it. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope you guys have a really great spring. We hope to see you in our next webinars. I think we have a biologist one coming up, but we also have some birthday webinars that are hosted by us, the Wolf Care Department, as well. So keep an eye out for those. You'll be receiving emails for when those are. Thank you all so much for joining us and for all of your support, especially during the Wolf Care auction. We definitely put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that, so we really appreciate to see it, or we really are happy to see it do well. So thank you guys and enjoy your evening.
Thank you all. Have a good night.